I hope you all have had opportunities to make new connections and have some interesting conversations so far. Welcome to the session on the journey to self-sovereign identity. And like any good story or any good journey, this one is comprised of an interesting cast of characters. First, I'd like to welcome Chuck Hounsell from TD Bank. Chuck will be representing our end user point of view in this story as a client of many of these solutions. Chuck, welcome. Thank you. Next, I'd like to welcome Greg Wolfond. Greg is the network founder and has really moved the needle on the quote-unquote Canadian solution. He joins us from Securekey. Greg, welcome. And last but not least, I'd like to welcome Jerry Cuomo from IBM. And IBM in this story, as it does in many others, plays the role of the technology provider. Welcome, gentlemen.
Well, you know, we do have a three-part story, and I get to tell the first part, and it's always great to go first, because that way if I use up any of Greg's material, it's his problem, not mine, right? But, you know, I work for a bank in Canada, and I think banks in Canada are very similar to banks around the world. We have a lot of problems. We have a lot of challenges. We have a lot of challenges in the marketplace. And a lot of it kind of goes like this. The story we tell goes like this. The price of payments is going to zero, and it's going to go to zero fairly quickly. And the reason it's doing that is because there are a lot of other people coming into our ecosystem that see value in the data that goes with payments. And banks have not really done a great job of creating enough value for customers with the data, so shame on us. So if you take a look at it, we have a lot of different things going on. In Europe, you have PSD2, and that brought about open banking in the UK. But I think of it more, it's more about open data. It's more about customers realizing that they have a lot of data that could be put to use for them. And today they choose to trade it off often for convenience, but in the future, they're going to want to get value for that. And so the question for banks is, we're going to lose revenue from transactions, payments. How are we going to create value leveraging data? How are we going to make sure our data is put to use? Because we have a very unique position with our customers. You know, what we learn about, and this is true in Canada, I think it's true in a lot of other countries, customers may not say they love their banks, but they trust them. And I know this because when you talk to customers and you ask them, you know, do they have a different logon routine for their bank than everybody else? And the answer is invariably yes. And would they trust their bank to help them authenticate to other sites? In Canada, we're already leveraging a service that's allowing our customers to log into other sites using Bank ID. And that's another example of how customers would trust us. And when it comes to data, I think customers trust us in part because, frankly, we've had access to their data, we've never really shared it, and we've never really done anything with it. So just by doing nothing with it, we look like somebody who's more trustworthy than other people who have been taking their data and using it against them, so to speak. So that's the first part of it. And when you take a look at, well, what do we want to do? We want to create value. And one of the most obvious ways we determine to create value is going to be in a digital ecosystem. And so I have a team of people that go around trying to figure out how can we create value. One of the things we looked at was a rental market. If we wanted to create a market, I looked at my son, I watched a 25-year-old young professional try to run an apartment. I watched him gather a bunch of information, take it to a rental office where somebody who didn't know what that information meant tried to make a decision, and then hung that information in a paper file where it's probably still there today for somebody to see. And all that could be replaced in an attribute-driven model with a simple yes or no. So by reducing the amount of information that's shared, we can create a lot of value. And this is true for just about any kind of account opening. At a bank, account opening is a very difficult thing. We have a lot of regulation we have to deal with. We have to satisfy a lot of KYC requirements. We can use a series of attributes to really remove a lot of friction from that process and meet all the regulatory requirements. And another thing the solution must entail when you think about what should be in a digital ecosystem is it's got to recognize it's really a mobile first, if not mobile only world nowadays. So people are going to show up at physical environments often with their device in their hand. And just the fact that they have their device in their hand tied with the whole ecosystem creates value. And no matter what you look at, you find friction for customers in just about everything they do. And since we started this journey, we started looking at all the different ways we could reduce friction. And whenever we can help reduce friction, then we can be seen to help create value. And we've looked at government-driven models where identity is at the center of it, but they tend to really be limited for government use and difficult to apply to other things. That's why we're looking for something that's going to be more of a market-driven, that's going to give an opportunity for other things to come to market. We look at the Internet of Things as just a whole range of new sources of data that are about to come online. And so we need a model that's going to help embrace what that brings to the table. And I think the last thing that everybody knows is everybody wants more control over their data. So we need something that's going to really merge privacy, security, and control, and also enable people to get new value from their data. So what we really need for success, and what we've been working on with Securekey and others, is creating an open ecosystem. And I think this is really key. It's one that can onboard a whole bunch of attributes. So all kinds of people participating in an ecosystem can help customers derive attributes that can be used to create value. And those attributes can be used in conjunction with each other, multiple attributes together, to tell a better and more important story depending on the scenario. We think whatever system comes to market has to be commercial by design, because there's no sense having a great system that you can't get implemented. So it has to have commercial legs, meaning people in the ecosystem have to be motivated to want to participate. And that really means market rates for providing attributes, a commercial system. And we think it has to set the standard for privacy and for security at the same time, because that's what consumers are going to demand. And of course, it has to work in real time. And it has to really work on everyday experiences. I don't open a bank account every day. I don't go rent an apartment every day. But maybe I buy things on security, online with like an eBay type of thing on a more frequent basis. That I access government services, plus I access different logons at different things, Airbnb, Uber, all these types of services. Something that creates a frequency of use is going to be critical. I think the whole thing is, it comes right down to, from my point of view, banks have an opportunity to provide a context in which customers engage with an ecosystem that's about digital identity and helps them destroy a whole bunch of friction in their life and therefore create value, for which the banks get rewarded by being able to be present at the transaction. Because what we're finding is more and more, we're not even there for the transaction. So if we can be there and help customers with the identity, then maybe we can be there for the payment as well. And that's the way we look at it. And the next part of the story really is about how it works. And so I'll pass it over to Greg.
Thanks, Chuck. Thanks, Chuck. Did that work? Okay. Yeah, so as Chuck talked about, I'll just take a few minutes and talk about the solution that we're putting together starting in Canada. And we talk about digital ID, but I think Chuck said it better. It's really about attributes and sharing attributes. When you talk to your spouse about digital ID, they won't know what it is. But if you talk about, I just want to make it easier to show up at a call center of a bank or government and prove who you are to get things done and not be asked 26 questions that you don't know the answer to, or show up online to create an account. How do you get that done? We're all that me person there, showing up at call center, showing up in branch, and showing up online. And the problem we're trying to solve is, how do I just get things done, as Chuck says, in a frictionless way? So you saw the announcement, I think last November, that all the banks in Canada invested in Securekey. That wasn't the start of our journey. We run a service called Securekey Concierge, where millions of Canadians use their bank login to go to CRA, which is our IRS, or unemployment, or welfare, or immigration, a service that has lots of volume these days for some reason. It's quite staggering. But But we started with the authentication piece to show who use a bank login, something I remember when I come back. Like for anyone here who's used the IRS system and has a user ID and password, when you come back the next year, everyone remembers their password? Exactly, that's the problem. There's too many of these user IDs and passwords. But what the banks wanted to do is exactly what Chuck talks about. How do we help our customers? How do we deliver more value to them and create better experiences so that we're providing value in their lives and get rid of friction in this experience? And at the same time, we help the financial institution because we've got a lower cost for us. We have to get stronger identity surety, and we have to bring down the cost of dealing with customers across the bank. And for any of the banks in Canada, they have to open millions of accounts a year just to stay even on the customers they have. It's the same with telcos. It's the same with any kind of other service provider. People are free to move around. So how do you add value and make it easier for customers to join you? So this general notion that we have when we move towards identity is around, this is the customer. This is the me in the middle. And what she wants to do is she just wants to take her things. Her bank knows her name, her address, her account number. Her telco knows the SIM that's in her phone and the location of the phone. The state knows her driver's license, and her face matches the driver's license. What if she could just take those things, kind of in a metaphor similar to the real world, and when she shows up to open a new bank account or a telco account, share the data from different providers with someone they want to go to with consent, and be able to open a new bank account or log into government by just touching a finger on my iPhone, or set up my university account and things like that. And that's what we've actually put together in Canada. There's some slides here that show from the first version that we did. This is the current version's 2 versions later than this, but we had some video from the usability study showing how this works. And this was just Carol, who's trying to how do I set this up? How would I start? So she launches the application, and she's asked right away, choose your financial partner. And she chooses TD Bank, and you'll see she has very fast thumbs. She types in her username and password. She's like our kids. They type about that fast. And when she logs in, there's terms and conditions for sharing data. And it says, hey, Lena, welcome. Here's your data. Do you want to be able to share it? We'll only share it with your consent. And she says, OK. And that's it. Her account's created. It says TD verified, and on she goes. Now, she goes on in this example to verify her phone, because when she's sharing data, we want to make it easier for Carol to share her data to providers she wants to, and harder for the bad guy to be her. So they have to have her phone and know her login or biometric on the device to be her. And she's going ahead of me. I can't keep up. And she's adding her credit score. So she's gone to TransUnion in this case. She's loaded her credit score. She's answered some questions. And now she'll be able to get alerts if things happen on her credit, as an example. But these are 3 different providers who've given data. And I think she plays around here and goes to look at her data at the different providers. But the general idea is not hard to add. In the final usability stuff, we didn't make it mandatory to add them all at once. She'll probably just add her bank to start, and she can add the others in real time when she needs them. So another example of how she would use that, like how would we as consumers, if I had this thing with my bank, use it? So this is an example of Carol, who's showing up at a telco, and she wants to open a new account, I think for an iPhone 8, which is rumored, but we're not speculating. So she basically can take a picture of a QR, she can enter a mobile number, she can click on a link if it's inside her app, and it asks her, are you willing to share this data from your bank, this from your credit agency, and this from your telco? And she says, okay, and she authenticates, and the telco says, I think, thanks, Lena, welcome, your account's open. So kind of like our experience at telcos today, right? No one's waited 35 minutes in line, filled in a piece of paper that they retype into the computer later. So that's the kind of idea. We want to make it that simple for people to go. I have an in-app experience that I'd show, but it's the exact same thing. Can I click on this in-app and go, I'm short on time, so I'll skip over, but it has to work with a click. The general notion of this problem that we're solving, we talk about identity or digital identity, looks something like this, right? In the original world, we would show up at a bank or a telco, and we want to create an account. We would choose what documents to show. We're going to show our driver's license, or we're going to show our passport. Maybe we'll show a bill from our hydro company to prove it's us. The beauty of the system is the consumer's in the middle, and the provider of information doesn't know where I'm sharing it. So that's an important part. In the physical world, when we think about the manual way we do this, when you show your driver's license to prove it's you at a bar or a liquor store, there's no way that the state knows you went there, right? We have to maintain that part of this, and it's a great thing that the consumer's kind of in charge. But the bad thing about this world is there's lots of friction. There's lots of opportunity for fraud. Like you saw Ed Snowden talk this morning, right? And he talked about IoT things and all of that. I don't know how many of you checked into a hotel when you came to Washington, and how many of you, when you checked in and handed over your credit card, showed your driver's license? Anybody? How many showed their driver's license? Right. How many people noticed the video camera behind the desk that's a totally insecure system taking a photo of your driver's license? They're not secured at all, right? So if someone gets the driver's license, they can be you and do these things. The bad guys have figured this out in a heartbeat. That's not a secure document. So really easy to commit fraud, and there's manual ways to connect, but then parties know about each other. So we created in Canada this thing called Securekey Concierge. We did the connect.gov work in the US, and we do some work in Europe helping a company that's helping with some of the UK Verify stuff. So we learned a lot about how we're going, but the feedback we would get about this credential broker in the middle is it's great because it makes it easier to log on, and it's great for federated login because there's no PII running through it. But the NIST folks and others would rightfully say, I think, that the problem with the broker in the middle is they could be honest but curious. If they want to open this up and see everywhere Andre went or Greg went, they could just peek and see all the data and where it goes. And as you know, it's a single point of failure, so baby monitors could take the system down. It often requires us to build honeypots of data, so all your passport, your driver's license, everything is sitting in a big database, which is not a good thing when the bad guys are trying to get that data to create identities on you, to put mortgages on your house, to take over your accounts. We don't believe in that stuff, and it allows user tracking. So NIST pushed, and we got a grant from Homeland Security saying, what if we could build this without having a broker in the middle? How do you build this in a distributed fashion? And that's where I'm going to hand it over to Jerry soon at HyperLedger. We figured out, how would we rebuild this? Even though we were the best at building brokers, how do we build it without a broker in the middle? How can we make it that all of my data stays where it's supposed to be? My TD Bank's data stays at TD, my credit agency data stays there, my state government data stays there. And then with consent, I can release it, as you saw before, but there's much better flows that we have that are single-click kind of flows now. With a single click, I want to release this data to this party for this purpose, and I have consent every time. So all of a sudden, no data visible to network operator. So we Securekey, we don't run the network, we can't see it. No central database or honeypots of data. No central point of failure, so resilient to denial of service attacks. We talk about triple blind privacy. The provider of the data doesn't get to know where I'm going. If you don't have this kind of privacy, you'll never get government to join, or you should never get government to join, because then you could be tracked when you went to a cancer care clinic, or you could get tracked when you go somewhere else, something that you wouldn't want others to know that you're doing. You have to make sure the receiving party doesn't necessarily know who the provider is. So in the Government of Canada case, if I log on with TD Bank or Royal Bank, the government can know that I've logged in at a level 2 or a level 3, but they can't know who the provider is. I don't want them to know who I bank with. So I have to blind the other side. And the network in the middle shouldn't see anything. And so that's kind of the problem we set out to solve, and that we're launching in Canada later this year. It's a pretty exciting model because it leads to a gazillion use cases. Everything from, hey, someone who wants to build an app for the nurse going to dad's home, and you want to know she's actually there, and she's there from 2 o'clock to 4 o'clock in the afternoon. You can't do it with just bank data, right? You need telco data. You need to know that this is the device and it's in the home. And if I'm not sure it's Greg, I want to know it's him for an apartment. In Chuck's example before, they don't just want to know it's Greg. They probably don't care it's Greg. They want to know, who are you? I want someone to attest that you're a valid person. I want to know your credit score is over 650 or over 700. And I want a background check to make sure you're not going to trash the place. How do you share that in a single click with a provider? And then once you do that, hey, would you like to sign up for internet service? Click here. Or would you like to get tenant insurance and things like that? How do you make these experiences better for consumers? So that's kind of what we're building. A whole bunch of attribute providers, giving to a whole bunch of receivers, and an app ecosystem based on the IBM Bluemix stack. And in the end, we end up with this whole you are you, or I am me, with privacy and security, but the consumer's in the middle. All kinds of app developers can build frictionless experiences. We have strong ID validation because we know, kind of like chip and pin in the EMV world, I know what device I'm coming from, and I've got auth on that device. And we get valid, so security, from the security standpoint, we get what I know, like my bank password, what I have, my device, what I am, biometrics, or turn on the camera and check my face against the British Columbia database. And on the multiple sources of validation, it's up to the relying party to decide what's good enough for them, right? If I'm a bank and I'm going to put a mortgage on Chuck's house, I probably want strong validation. I want to check more sources because it's a large amount of a loan to make sure it's actually Chuck who's applying for that loan. If I'm just a prepaid debit card or a credit card issuer at the stadium, I might just say, hey, enter your number, and my phone wakes up and says, hey, are you willing to share your name and address and your credit score? Yep, okay, your account's open. And that's how fast it should take to get things done. But all of that was done with privacy and consent, where no party in the network can look in and see all the places a consumer went, where there's an ability, only the consumer knows where they're sharing that data. And you have all the process, like the whole legal framework of what does it take for a bank or a telco to share their data, what are the liability rules, what do the receivers get. It's kind of what we're trying to build in Canada to show first, that this can be solved in a brokerless model without someone in the middle that really empowers the consumer in the middle and allows an ecosystem to get built. So I'll turn it to you, Jerry, to talk about the underlying layers of how we do all that. Okay, thanks.
Hey, everyone. Guys awake? That's pretty good stuff. One of the things that really excites me as one of the technology leaders in IBM is when we have a live one, you know? And we have 2 live ones right here, so it's even better. I mean, there's been a lot of talk around the journey to sovereign identity. And it's been a lot of talk, it's been a lot of interesting papers and frameworks. And I really believe, you know, as a technologist, this is one of the rare occasions in my life where some of the things we're working on could actually make our lives better. So the desire to get to a live one and really start going beyond the papers and the talk is really compelling. So thank you guys for bringing this use case to life. And if we see that journey progressing, you've been all there before, right? Wave 1 was really about the web, right? Around centralized identity, right? And we've come up with a lot of good, interesting technologies around how to manage technology, identity at scale over the web. But that's, you know, hundreds of thousands of digital users in Wave 1. As we grow into, you know, into the social era with Wave 2, social media, mobile, tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions now, of users, and that brought out a world of federated identity. But here we are now. I think we've entered now the world of user-centric identity. Right? It's a major step forward towards self-sovereign identity. And when you listen to Chuck and Greg talk, we have now a live network and pilot in Canada that is really showing off the crown jewels, which I'll talk about in a second, of user-centric identity, really identifying, engaging, creating this ecosystem, which is a key part of it. And I'll talk a little bit about cognitive and transforming that in a second. And then, of course, with these 3 things, I believe you now have an environment of phase 4, which is self-sovereign. All right? So the crown jewels here, really looking at the key elements of a trusted digital identity framework. And this is not stuff, obviously, we've made up. This is, if you look at NIST's Trusted Identity Group, if you look at the World Economic Forum and the work around, you know, building digital identity, you'll see these characteristics front and center, right? And again, it has become the gold standard. User is the ultimate authority, right? Privacy enhanced and voluntary, right? Decentralized and distributed trust. I always get people saying, why, Jerry, do you need blockchain? Why do you think you need blockchain to solve this? And ultimately, by the way, I'm known as Blockchain Jerry at IBM. That's where I'm going. So why, you know, decentralized and distributed trust? Why is that important? And you'll see in a second. Open and flexible, interoperable and portable, viable and sustainable. I think these are some of the key elements that I think we have set as the gold standard. And ladies and gentlemen, I will tell you right now that blockchain brings this to the table. And there may be other ways to implement such an ecosystem around identity, but this way works. Right? And I think the blockchain technology was put on this earth to solve this problem. And I will say that, you know, when you look at no data visible to network operators, no central database or honeypots, no central points of failure, triple-blind privacy, Greg just explained what that is, and you cannot track user across relying parties. Those are some hefty requirements, right? And it also required a new style of blockchain, right? So we were greatly and are greatly inspired with what we've seen over the years from the Bitcoin blockchain implementation. We've seen what Ethereum has done, and I, you know, a few years ago, grew up as an Ethereum fanboy, and really appreciated some of the key attributes in those blockchains. But blockchain, first and foremost, I think is a design pattern, thinking of it as an engine blueprint, right? There's not just one type of engine out there, right? There's gasoline engines, there's electric engines, so you can take those attributes of a technology like blockchain, you can apply them in different ways. And what we found is to solve these problems, and you see these in digital identity. In IBM, we're working on projects around food safety, global trade digitization, and many, many other types of projects where data privacy matters, right? And where following regulatory rules matter, right? So that required looking at blockchain from a slightly different perspective, right? And we and several others in the industry started looking at what we call a permissioned blockchain. Some people call it a private blockchain. I prefer the permission aspect. And in a permission blockchain, I think that plus the blockchain DNA, right? Maybe this is now the electric blockchain versus the gas-powered blockchain that Bitcoin and Ethereum have. We now have all the elements. So the four key aspects are the ledger, right? And in an identity ecosystem, we're not keeping identity attributes on the ledger. And this is something that is confused. That would make it a honeypot, even though it's encrypted and linked and all of that kind of good stuff. It's something we want to do, but we use the ledger as a way to put proofs, right? Proofs of permissions that have been granted, and users opting in and sharing that permission with some of the digital asset providers and digital asset consumers, right? So it becomes a proofing engine, it becomes a permissioning, an ACL system, and ultimately a matching engine, right? So that if a consumer comes in and allows a telco to send a request on their behalf to a number of working institutions in the network, the actual request will hit the right destinations that are permissioned by that user to answer those questions, right? And of course, doing that in a triple blind way makes it pretty interesting. Privacy, right? This is all about privacy, right? So in the blockchain and in a permission blockchain, you have key provisions, right? The members who kind of manage the institutions that manage the integrity of the ledger are permissioned, meaning they each get a digital membership card that allows them to perform consent on the transactions coming into the ledger, right? So that's an important part. And privacy matters, meaning as we're interacting on the blockchain, we're doing it privately, right? But at the network governance level, there's recourse, right? Recourse in the form of, let's say if there's a break the glass scenario and there's an audit that occurs and we have to see what happened, there's actually the means of doing that within that network, right? Versus everyone in the network is completely operating anonymously, right? So privacy is key, but also working within a set of privacy rules. And that's where smart contracts come into play. So this manages permissions and visibility of identity, right? We're doing some, I'll tell you this in a second, but we're doing some pretty interesting things around smart contracts and really making them smart, right? And how we're using cognitive technology like Watson to ingest 500-page regulations and using natural language to kind of synthesize the obligations out of those regulations so that mortals who can't understand 500 pages of legalese could interpret what's being kind of at least approached from an obligation perspective. And then those become the design docs for smart contracts. So as you enter the network, you can actually see the provenance of where the actual agreement started and what are the rules, how those rules are being interpreted, and then how those rules are being executed on members' behalf, right, as a form of smart contract. So this type of blockchain is critical to, and I would say more than just critical, you wouldn't be able to get to these features unless you use blockchain. So our blockchain has a name, and it's real, it's out there right now, and it's being managed with the Linux Foundation. The project is called the HyperLedger Project. The HyperLedger Project was announced in 2015. starting with 17 founders. Now there is over 130 paid members. It is an umbrella project for, I would say, blockchain technology where data privacy and regulations matter. So for, I would say, for business applications. And under the umbrella, there's a number of open source projects. One of them is the HyperLedger Fabric, and that's a project that we were amongst the founders of in IBM, and we donated an initial set of code and IP to kind of catalyze this notion of a permissioned blockchain. So that's an important part of the Securekey identity verification network utilizing the HyperLedger Fabric. Right? And I encourage folks to get engaged with that. In fact, I saw the Sovereign Project out in the hallway there. They just recently joined the HyperLedger Project. I think standards are key, right? And participation from government institutions, private sector, as well as technology companies are key to make this work. So when you look at the benefits, I think you've heard the team talk about from this approach. There's benefits to the individual, and certainly the user experience that you saw Greg demonstrate was pretty darn compelling, right? In the end, folks who want to buy a house are probably going to need a mortgage from a bank. If you want to get on a plane, you're probably going to need a document from a government agency. If you want a phone and a data plan, you're probably going to need a telco. So looking at how to friend, I look kind of like a new style of Facebook where this ecosystem, you can friend the institutions that are standing behind you, right, in a very compelling mobile user experience. From businesses, really it helps reduce costs and risk for doing things that have to be done, for example, around account opening, KYC, AML. But when you get into this ecosystem, where I really get excited is the opportunities to jump tracks. Right? If you're a financial services company, help validate people for clinical trials, right? And really start to close this community and make it a tighter community so that healthcare, financial services, retail, again, that makes up our digital life. We're just not a one-dimensional person. We're multidimensional. So this ecosystem and having institutions really open up new opportunities for business to collaborate and jump the tracks. And of course, last but not least, governments, right? Distributed trust and increasing protection across the identity area. I was at a commission for enhancing national security last year that Obama set off. And one of the, actually, it was a general we were kind of explaining how blockchain can help protect identity through such a network. And what he came to the realization was that we spend so much time fighting the bad guy. In a blockchain, the bad guy. But in a blockchain network, you really need, the network could still operate with 51%, bad actors. And he kind of had this, not quite accurate, but it was interesting to see that light bulb go off, that these networks are fault tolerant, right? And you don't have to eliminate every bad person out there, every bad actor, right? It can tolerate some number. So it was very interesting from that perspective, reducing counterfeiting, fraud, theft, et cetera. So from a benefit perspective, once we have this identity infrastructure in place that we have in Canada and take it worldwide, I think the benefits transcend. And from a reference architecture perspective, some of the things I had mentioned, from an application perspective, trusted, distributed, self-sovereign identity with a simplified experience sitting on top. We have the things I talked about with respect to understanding things like risk, reputation, understanding regulations and how they're being interpreted and applied to a system. I think these are all things that it would be nice to translate for mortals, to be able to understand what are your privacy rights, how are they being followed, and kind of using the likes of Watson as an interpreter or a personal assistant to make sure all of missed opportunities aren't there and all of the opportunities are there. Then we have the work that we're doing with Securekey around the digital identity ecosystem, focusing initially on individuals, but you can imagine expanding this out to things as well as institutions. and then all foundationed on a blockchain, right? And then, of course, from there, I think, the world is our oyster. I mean, there are many places we can go, and we see it really becomes, in my opinion, a new style of application platform, right? Because when you think about applying identity, it's not any one industry that benefits, right? As the previous slide showed, it's cross-industry, right? It's a horizontal platform, right? So building out a trusted identity platform that supports multiple use cases, know your customer, driver's license, and then things across that cross-cut around an identity ecosystem, starting with a bank ID, but using that bank ID where you may securely store your credit card information, using that ultimately as a vault where you keep your healthcare records, right? But share that key, like you do your lockbox at your old bank, but share that key across trusted members of a network, right? And I think that really opens up a world of new possibility. We're very excited about it. And it's real, it's here, and it's now. It's not something that's coming, or that might come, or could come. It's actually here, and you're seeing different representatives here to tell that story. All right, so to learn more, outside, both IBM and Securekey have booths. Come visit and share your experiences with us. We also have some one-on-ones that we still have openings that you want to schedule. You can do it out there, or go ahead and visit ibm.com/blockchain/identity for more information. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Greg and Chuck. Appreciate it.